Hi you guys, this is Jeff the Bee Whisperer. We're going to be going over organic gardens, koi ponds, and owl boxes.
I have bees in my backyard where I have other animals. What can be done?
Well, if it's a hive that's only been in there for 2 weeks and it's the size of a pineapple, and you could go in there and you can vacuum them and gain control of them. When you can get control of them, the hives aren't too big. They're an excellent candidate for live removal. However, if the hive's been there for 3-4 months or longer, it's a very large hive now, there's a lot more risk associated with it. In those cases, elimination might be the best way, but there's certain things that need to be done before the elimination to guarantee that the animals are not going to be put at risk of being injured or killed from the pesticide application.
Yeah.
But if you got a hive that's been there 4 months, you're not going to go up with a vacuum and start vacuuming bees off the hive and every animal's getting stung. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, so one's getting killed by the bees, the other one's getting killed by the pesticides. You know what I mean? It's like you got to weigh them out and say, for me, I look at it, I'd rather do more prep work and spend more time prepping it and getting the animals under control and putting them in the house or in buckets and removing them from the site, prepping it out, and then spraying and killing it. And then after everything's under control, no more bees, cleaning the area up, making sure it's safe, and then reintroducing the animals. That's where I'm coming from. That's where I usually come from, because I can tell you how many animals I see that get attacked by bees. And way more animals get killed by bee stings than by pesticides. That's what I look at. That's how I see it. So that's my story. I'm gonna stick to it.
There's a beehive near my koi pond. Can you get rid of the bees and not hurt my fish?
That's the koi ponds, for example. You know, she mentioned how it's a great candidate where live removal is the best way to go whenever it's possible around aquatics, because they're highly toxic to the pesticides that are applied to the bees to kill them off. It could also kill the koi in the pond. In some instances, that's a really good fit when it's a residential type pond and it's a smaller pond that you can easily get the fish under control. You might have a dozen or a couple dozen fish in the pond. But in a commercial type setting, like one I did down here in a hotel, they had thousands of gallons of water. They had pumps, little ponds, little rivers set up going through the walkways, and it would have been quite an overwhelming task to get all those fish under control. And then also, it would have been too much work. You couldn't empty the pond. I mean, it would have been thousands of gallons of water. So in a case like that, picking the time of day when there's the least amount of wind, such as maybe earlier in the morning when the winds are calmer, or very little or no wind at all, or maybe towards the later in the evening time, not only for the wind, for the drift and the pesticide running off into the pond, but also for the safety factor of keeping people safe, because earlier in the morning and earlier in the evenings, it's less people around. And then you make sure you lay down a tarp big enough that any drift, depending on how high you are off the ground, you're going to want to make sure that any drift lands on that plastic so that you can gain control of the pesticide being applied. It doesn't matter if it's a koi pond or an organic garden or whatever it is. You want to make certain that any areas that are sensitive where you can possibly contaminate food, organic food, or even non-organic food, you want to make sure it's not being covered with pesticides through drift or runoff. So in that case, prepping it out properly, removing the animals when safe to do so, prepping it out with plastic, gaining control of the pesticides, and making sure that you apply it at a time of day when it's safe to do so, and there's less chance for drift or runoff. And that's really the thing there. Such as, I'll bring an example. We did a job a few years ago in the Chula Vista neighborhood. A lady had some organic gardens in her backyard, and she had a beehive in a roof that was fairly close. I think it was like maybe 8 or 10 feet away from her garden. But for safety concerns, I went ahead and I laid some Visqueen out over her garden right before I sprayed. I didn't want to lay it over her garden and burn her plants, so I put it on right before I was actually ready to spray the pesticide in her roof to kill off the bees. And then when I was done and there was no more risk, I went ahead and rolled up the plastic so that none of the drift got on her plants. But I was also mindful of the fact that I chose a time of day when there wasn't a lot of wind, so there's going to be a lot less drift. And I also made sure that when I put the pressure in my tank, I used a lower pressure to reduce the amount of pesticide being applied into the air.
You say that you do live bee removal. Why would you spray the bees instead?
There's many cases, like even an owl box. I've done many owl boxes live. We go out and it's a small hive. It's been there about a week or two. We go up with the vacuum. I vacuum out the bees, cut the comb out, put it in the box, do live removal. Everything goes good. The birds, aren't in the box as they left because the bees kind of pushed them out. Once the box is clean, I tell the people they can get up there with some hot soap and water and just clean out the residual wax or dead bees that are in there, because the bees are constantly dying, and then clean it up and get it ready for the owls to go back in the box. But there's times when you get into an owl box, been in it for 4 or 5 years, 2 or 3 years. The box is filled. It's a very risky task. I mean, we've had guys in our company that have been stung through their suits trying to do live removal with owl boxes. I, on the other hand, won't do live when a hive's been in there that long. I will spray it, eliminate it, and then I will take the owl box down a few days later and get rid of it. Because, as an example, we were doing an owl box, about a week ago, and as we were prepping the job out, trying to assess it, a guy came walking down his driveway, and it was in a rural area where everyone's sitting on about 1 acre lots. If we'd have been trying to do live, that guy with his dog would have been getting attacked by these bees. So you can see why you got to really consider all things. It's just a matter of being in a city or being in a rural area. It's assessing the risk associated with that hive removal. How big is it? How much risk is there? And then you make that determination. Anytime I see a huge hive, I know that there's a greater chance of someone getting hurt, and I usually don't take the risk. I put safety before anything else. Your house, if I had to guess, I'd say it's a 95% chance they're going to go in your chimney. The next day I get the call. Yep, they're up on top of our chimney. Come and get them. Come and get them. And they're like, how did you know? I said, because when you're in your house, they're swarming your chimney, they're scalp pheromones, they landed in your front yard, there's a resting spot, and they're going to go in your chimney. Thanks for watching, you guys. If you like this sort of thing, send in your questions, hit that like button, follow us on Twitter.